Hi, I run an eBay book selling enterprise called The Poor Scholar, and in imitation of what I've seen other people do, I thought I'd post some YouTube videos after I've come back from buying things to show you stuff that's going to be, and in many cases already is, um, on the store. So this past weekend, the 14th and 15th of January, I went to an estate sale, which was held on Sunday, which is a little unusual because usually because it was the first day. Usually the first day is either the Friday or the Saturday, and it continues through the weekend. But then on Saturday, I went to some library sales. Got a little later start than I wanted to because a lot of particularly smaller town library sales on a Saturday, it might be from like 9 to 1 are the hours that the sale is open, because of course usually it's run by a fairly small group of retirees. Um, so I went on Saturday to Greencastle, where DePaul University is, then to a small town called Spencer, a little more southerly in Indiana, and then to Bloomington, of course, the home of IU, which was, of course, part of the reason I went there, because for what I like to sell, a lot of academic monographs or scholarly nonfiction. Libraries in college towns or library sales in college towns can be good sources for that. And then on Sunday, I went to an estate sale up north in Fulton County, near Akron, Indiana. And this was out in the country. I've been to some estate sales that were out in like the exurbs, but this genuinely was the country. It was on a farm, a house and a barn. And that's what originally lured me out of my lair, because they had listed for sale and pictures of various atlases, which I find interesting. This one is a 19th century atlas of the state of Indiana. They had a Fulton County atlas. You'll see those around like late 19th, sometimes very early 20th century, like county atlases, which are not just practical atlases, but they're also usually full of like written biographies, sometimes of prominent citizens, as well as things like lithographs of both portraits of people and of local landmarks. Someone else probably snagged the Fulton County Atlas. I didn't see it when I went through. It was I arrived about half an hour before the sale started, which I knew was cutting it a little close. But when I arrived half an hour before the sale started, there were already 68 people. I was the 68th person, which is interesting because in a little more urban populated area, you can arrive, the hour or even the half hour before an estate sale starts, and you'll be, the 12th person or the 15th person. But this was, a particularly good sale, I think, with lots of different things, to attract people, whether it's the glassware, the ceramics, or more practical things like tools. But on to the atlas. This, as you might see, is not in great condition. It's very common with atlases. They are large, heavy books, and people tend to open them flat because that's what you do to look at an atlas, unless you're in a rare book room in a university library and you've got a book cradle or something. And so they tend to have real problems with the spines, these old atlases. And this one is no exception. In fact, the front board is entirely detached. This is not on eBay. I might have to see about having this rebound. And you could also see that the person who owned it before me, you were using electrical tape to repair it. And I didn't really tear it off. They sort of came off when I touched it because, of course, the electrical tape dries out and then it leaves the sticker residue on the cover. The cure was worse than the disease. But this does have examples of many of the things that are cool. So right here, we've got the lithographed portraits. And let's see if we can find a map. So we've got a map here. My understanding is sometimes in the old atlases, particularly the older ones, they were printed, and then a watercolorist had to come in and do some of the color by hand. I don't know about this particular one yet. And let's see if we can find some lithographs of local landmarks. And then here's more people. Anyway, very cool stuff. And a lot of these old atlases, like I said, are also of interest to the genealogically inclined, because they might have articles about local individuals, particularly, prominent citizens. They loved prominent citizens in the 19th century. And the other thing I found, which was actually an interesting piece of family history from the estate sale, is this is a commission. You can see the ring light being reflected there, but this is a commission for a justice of the peace. I read it, and what's interesting is this guy was appointed justice of the peace because the previous justice of the peace had been removed, and so he was going to be justice of the peace until the next election could be held. So I don't know if there's any scandal there, but anyway, it has the seal of the state of Indiana, and the date is 1809. And the other interesting thing is this handwritten part is the oath to take to become a justice of the peace, which is written on the back. And it looks to me like one person wrote the oath, like the actual professional or semi-professional clerk, and then the other guy, that person taking the oath, signed it. But that's something it's not on the up yet, because I have yet to do more research to price it. But where I am more comfortable is books. And at the estate sale, they had lots of interesting books about local history, which I've sort of mixed in with other books. I sort of try to consolidate everything down to these 3 boxes. So I won't go through everything, but I always like, we've got here, one of them is a little more damage in the spine, but this is the like a reissue of a diary of someone who served in the 12th Regiment of Indiana Volunteers. And I looked just up on my phone when I was in my car. I looked up the 12th Indiana, and I do believe they saw some hard fighting in the Western Theater of operations. If I remember correctly, they might have been part of Sherman's drive to the sea. Then another interesting thing, of course, is local history. I have these sorts of, this one's more like a perfect bound, sort of glued book, and this one is a stapled booklet, but they're local history from the Fulton County Historical Society. And then I won't go through these all individually, but I noticed, and these might have been a mistake from a financial point of view, because they were $1 a piece, and for what you're selling them for, unless as I go through them I find a particularly good story. I mean, there are some famous authors. You've got Jack Vance, all your dying Earth needs. Let's see, Gordon R. Dixon. Anyway, these are science fiction magazines from the 70s. Very famous magazines like Galaxy and Fantastic, Amazing Science Fiction, and so on and so forth. And they had whole fistfuls. And it's funny because they're all from the same year. It's not like they're just 70s magazines. It's like they're all from 1974. Like they got on a real kick of, there's Frederick Pohl. That's cool. Anyway. Oh. Yeah. There's some interesting cover art. The magazine of fantasy and science fiction. That, unless I miss my guess, is actually one of the print science fiction magazines that's still around. There's like only 3 of them. News stories by Isaac Asimov and Lester Del Rey. Like I said, these are quite common. I can even go to the local half-price books and find science fiction magazines from the 50s for like $2 a piece. So it all depends, is because there are some science fiction novels that later went on to become famous that originally appeared as a short story, a novella, or multiple short stories in magazines. And so some of those can be more collectible. Plenty of famous authors here: Brian Aldiss and Paul Anderson, who we'll see again, but nothing like, Dune or something like that. There's also this one, which is in very bad condition. There are other copies of it that are in much better condition for sale online. But this is a Pennsylvania German, but specifically a Lutheran Pennsylvania German, alphabet learning book. And Pennsylvania German stuff is actually fairly collectible. I've sold lots of academic books about Pennsylvania Germans, like one on Mennonite folk costume, or another on actually a couple on like the dialect of Pennsylvania German, because it's descended from the dialects of German, of Plattdeutsch, but then also influenced by English, because some of them have been in America since the 17th century. But like I said, there are copies of this exact book that are in much better condition, and this one not only is has lots of aesthetic problems, but it also has a problem with the spine, which is not only aesthetic but structural. But I had fun. So because I was out on Sunday, I drove like another hour to sort of just outside of Fort Wayne, where they were having another estate sale, and I got there like half an hour before it closed. So I got some good deals on the books that I wanted, although the estate sale had been pretty well picked. People were cleaning up the debris, so they had some interesting books. There's a couple of different things that I'm experimenting with here, because they had some nonfiction, but then, I did something I don't usually do, which is grabbing fiction without looking it up, because with collectible vintage fiction, it's its own field that I don't know a lot about, and condition matters a lot. Whether the author or the particular title is collectible in and of itself matters a lot, as well as whether it's a book club of first edition, whether it's the first American. If it's a British book, then it's not worth as much. So this one, I actually don't think I made terrible mistakes considering the very low price I got him for. I got this one because, of course, it has a reference to ancient history. It's a novel, but it's called The Etruscan. It was a couple of months ago now, but they found some Etruscan inscriptions on statues in an archaeological site that actually added a lot of knowledge. Like, I think there was some god they didn't even know about, but then they found a statue of the god in an archaeological context. This is a nonfiction book. As you can see, the topic is religious, and this person did have a lot of religious topics in the library, but it's a very serious sort of academic work involving new translation from Hebrew. And one of the things sometimes is I look at the author biography, because if it's a history book, often, not always, but if it's written by someone who has more of a journalistic background, it means it's often a more popular narrative history that was printed in larger numbers. Nothing wrong with it, but just printed in larger numbers and therefore not that valuable. Not that it being written by a professional historian or something like that, or an academic scholar, makes it more a guaranteed profit, but it is more likely. Particularly if you can look at the title and you can tell that it's very obscure and hyper-specific. Specificity is good. Okay, there's some other books I got in that estate sale book because I photographed a lot of the books already and listed them. They've been rearranged. So this one was not quite a mistake. Local history can be very good, very profitable, but I will say, and this is a good thing, in fact, but the Indiana Historical Society seems to do a good job of keeping things in print, or at least you can buy dead stock from their website. So you can find this for $10 on their website. Used, it's not actually that common, but you can get it directly from their website for $10. So you know this one is in good condition. So I feel justified in getting $10 for it. But often, with organizations that either have gone out of existence or haven't as done as good a job of keeping things in print or available to the public, local history can be like a $40, $50 proposition easily. So I got a whole bunch of books from the library in Spencer, which is a smaller library. And as I went to the community room where they had this stuff laid out in tables, you know, I could see it was a sea of novels from more popular authors, nothing very looked appealing on the face of it. But as I picked through it, I found a couple of things. And because it was a smaller town, you know, the books are 50 cents each. You know, you go to the library sale in Indianapolis, the hardcover books are $3 each. I'm not complaining because you can go on the bag sale day and you can put, you know, a lot of them in much of them in the standard bags they hand you, and you can get them quite cheaply then. Although on the previous days people might have picked through some stuff. But because it was 50 cents, I took some risks. So this I just grabbed because you know, I could tell that it was old, you know, 1970s, and I was like, Roots, would the first edition of Roots be collectible? It turns out that there is some more damage. There are some dead ants in there that I cleaned out, but they left a stain. So not good, not terrible. This is a sort of book that's pretty common. I was interested in it because the author of this Vietnam memoir was a local, so those books can be of interest. But then as I opened it, my decision to buy it was confirmed by the fact that it was signed. So obviously, signed books, you know, it's not like it's going to be very expensive, but it can turn a $3 book into a $20 book or a $15 book or whatever. And with something like this, you don't have to worry about a forgery. I would never, if I found it something signed by Abraham Lincoln, I would have to consult a specialist. These are I took a risks on a bunch of history books that were 50 cents a piece. One of them you can see is X-Library. Like, this is a good example of what I was talking about earlier. It was written by an academic historian, very respectable and all, but just the Civil War is very interesting to lots of people. So the publishers, when they knew this was going to be something that, you know, you could publish and sell to ordinary people, not just, you know, 13 specialists in the same topic, which is actually more what this book is, which I'm not trying to insult, by the way. Napoleonic, there are hobbyists who are interested in Napoleonic history, but this is one of the things I found in that same library in Spencer, and immediately I knew it was gold because I have a bunch of medieval history books from Palgrave Macmillan, and they were all like $80 used. This one is mostly $80 used, but I saw one person who selling it for $35, and I thought I should also sell it for less because of some of the X-Library features. Now, the binding is still quite tight, and there's not damage to the interior, but those private academic publishers, sometimes they have lines that are more affordable or meant for the general public. But, you know, those Palgrave Macmillans, those Boydell and Brewers, the Brills, the Duke Reuters, all of those private academic publishers can produce some pretty expensive books. You know, ask your local professors about them; they'll rant about it. But this is the very interesting thing, like a biography of Napoleon. That's like a $5 book. Something called the Anglo-Swedish Alliance Against Napoleonic France. That's a little more particular. That is a good history book. A good history book, sorry. And that, finding that, I knew that I had done well in coming to Spencer. This is another decent one. I got this one. I knew it was either going to be $20 or $5 or something like that, because it's a subject like the SEALs holds popular appeal. But on the other hand, writing about SEAL operations in Vietnam is more specific. But this one, it had the dust jacket complete and all that, and in good condition. So, and for 50 cents, I took a risk on it. Now, let's see. This is one where sometimes temptation can go away with you. This is a $5 book. When shipping, when the price of the box is considered the amortized price of the gasoline, I probably shouldn't have purchased it, but I couldn't resist it, because it's about a Maine sea captain and it has actual excerpts from letters and diaries, so I thought it was pretty cool. Anyway, I will eventually go to someone who's interested in the topic who would probably never have gone to Spencer, Indiana, but I'll probably not make any, I'll probably break even off of it. And let's see, there's nothing else from Spencer, but the bottom of the box, because they were big and heavy, are two more things from the estate sale in Akron that I went to on Sunday morning. It's Fulton County Folks. Now, the local history can be very good. County histories are great. Many county histories can be very expensive, $50, $100, and they can also be very interesting. Obviously, there's a genealogical aspect, there's a social history aspect, and it just preserves lots of history. In particular, like here's all about some guy from the county and his experiences in World War I, which obviously lends a personal thing than just reading about, General Pershing or whatever. These ones, it's funny, this book is still kept in print by the County Historical Society. This book is, I don't think, any longer in print. I looked it up on the Fulton County Historical Society. Apparently they want to, because you can see this one's much larger, they want to break the second volume up into to 2 volumes. But great stuff. I realize it's very disorganized to talk about different stuff from different sales, but I wanted to rearrange stuff to get in the fewest boxes possible. So the heavier stuff ended up at the bottom, regardless of what it originally came from. These were from the Greencastle sale. Not very expensive books, but they're 50 cents, and they're very interesting. Trains is people are very interested in trains, and I, of course, thought this one was particularly interesting out of the books that they had that were about trains, because it was produced by the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers. Who would know better about trains, right? And also in that Greencastle sale, this one I bought, they had the vintage books separated out for $10 a piece. This one was probably a mistake from a strictly financial perspective. I priced it a little on the pricier end of the range, but I was tempted by its immaculate dust jacket. Like, obviously you've got the stuff on the corners, but it doesn't have any tears unless I accidentally add one. And I like the design. There's sort of something very stereotypical European about this gentleman, as opposed to this American with his very 1950s, bold tie there, versus him with the derby hat and the pipe and the furled umbrella. Looks very British. Despite the title being Frenchman's, or a subtitle being A Frenchman's Discovery of America and England. But we proceed on, and so one of the things is, in Bloomington, it's always keeping your eye out for sets of things. In Bloomington, they had specially priced at $5 a piece this set of 4 volumes, A Dictionary of British Folk Tales by Catherine M. Brigg. it's subdivided. There's one bit that's folk legends and one bit on folk narratives, and they have two versions each. But the 4 volumes is the complete set of all of them, and I uploaded those to eBay like yesterday or the day before yesterday, and they've already sold. It just goes to show you that often it's, the expensive specialized stuff that will sell quicker than some $5 book, because the people who are looking for something specialized are really looking for it. And there were versions of that set that were on Abe Books for much more than the price that I set for them. I mean, not too much more, but I was able to set what I thought was a reasonable price, considering that I had spent $20 on the set. This one also probably not, since I got it for a little more expensive, probably not, will make a profit on it, but a small one. But, a very biography of a certain person published by the University of Oklahoma Press. There's lots of books about University of Oklahoma Press, and then the University of Nebraska, I believe. They run an imprint called Bison Books. Lots of stuff about the West and about Native Americans. Although, of course, this guy, being an Seneca, is not from the West. He is from upstate New York, I think. I mean, there are the Six Nations of the Iroquois. There are some of them who were forced. So another interesting thing I gleaned from the State Settlement of Fort Wayne in New Haven, Indiana, is this, the King Strang story. I haven't read the book, but I do know a little bit. It's an interesting story. It's a bit of Michigan local history. But it regards Beaver Island. And so how I come to know it is, if you're interested in traditional music, Beaver Island, which is an island in northern Lake Michigan, is quite famous because in the 1850s there was a population of Irishmen who basically all moved to Beaver Island, all from the same island, Erinmore, which is off the coast of Donegal, and indeed, because the island was so sort of preponderantly settled by Irish people from an island off the coast of Donegal, even like 1 or 2 generations after the 1850s, there are still people who are speaking the Irish language on Beaver Island. And it's famous for its singers, traditional singers and fiddlers, folklorists like Ivan Walton and Alan Lomax, recorded people from the island. But before the Irish settlers arrived, there was this rather interesting fellow. So King Strang was the leader of a breakaway Mormon sect. And since we're talking about, 1850, we're talking about somebody who broke away like either while Joseph Smith was still alive or very shortly after. King Strang was a precocious little scamp. He broke away from Mormonism before other Mormon breakaway sects did. And King Strang, northern Michigan was not very heavily populated in 1850. So because Strang brought with him his followers, he could, they would all vote as a block in elections, and he sort of had a dominant influence in the community there until basically the Mormons were chased off the island by a mob. So an interesting bit of local history for Michiganders. Something else I found is at that same estate sale is these 2 volumes. These 2 volumes, which are the complete set, and this is an annotated bibliography. Now this is, I think, about different claims that there was contact between North America and other parts of the world prior to Columbus. what an annotated bibliography is, I don't know if there's as much of them around anymore, because nowadays people look up things or do searches for topics on like Google Scholar and JSTOR and stuff like that. But an annotated bibliography is a list of all the written sources that might be relevant for a particular subject, and then it has not just the entries but also notes, the annotations of the bibliography, to give you some idea of what it is about and whether it would be useful for your research or not. So this is a reference volume, and these works, there are people who are very, very interested in them, but not as common as other kinds of academic work. This is something I got in Bloomington. It's a history of Arizona and New Mexico. Like I said, local history or regional or state history can be very good. Not always. You always have to check. I passed on a history of Nebraska that was very common, but this one is a facsimile edition, which means that they're trying to recreate a previous printed work. Not just retype it, but replicate its visual appearance. Now this, of course, is obviously a modern hardcover book rather than a 19th century book, but internally they're trying to preserve the original appearance of sort of the classic narrative history work. So I also think that's pretty interesting. And Bloomington, as you might expect, was very fruitful in all different kinds of scholarly works. This one is probably one of the third or fourth most valuable books I found on my trip. It's like an academic philosophy book, Imagination and the Nature of Choice, and they had this displayed like this with the front out, and just by looking at it you can tell it's a book from the 60s because it has it's a matte dust jacket. It's not glossy, and it has a very minimalist cover design, but minimalist in sort of a sleek 60s way. You've got all these weird parentheses, and the title is very spaced out. It's a very 1960s cover design. But yeah, it's a book of philosophy, and I have several other philosophy books, and the more obscure or academic, the better. Now this, just because I can't resist anything that has to do with the Middle Ages, 12th century Europe, an interpretive essay, not particularly valuable, but still a very good, solid sort of value. Contesting Apartheid, this is another academic book, has a sticker on the back, but the dust jacket is otherwise very nice. This is written in the 1990s, so quite recent, to the topic it's discussing, since it goes through 1987, and it's about sort of the American activists protesting against apartheid. No dust jacket for this one, but this is, and you can just tell from the title, like academic works have often a particular pattern of titles, or I should say history books definitely have. So Knightly Piety and the Lay Response to the First Crusade. You can definitely tell that's an academic book, and of course it deals with medieval Europe, so I can't resist it. Two other fruits that I gleaned from the Bloomington sale, both sort of classic academic type works. This one is a sort of Victorian social history. As you can see, a very glossy dust jacket, unlike the 1960s one. And this is sort of cultural history about, I think it's a Jewish religious thinker. It's funny because with his hat and his collar bands, even though he's Jewish, he does very much look like a 19th century Protestant clergyman. Like, I don't know much about clerical dress, but there's probably plenty of 19th century German Lutheran pastors who were wearing that type of collar band there. But anyway, just again, more classic. These dust jackets were a little more tattered, probably a little more used, but just classic academic books, which have a great potential for resale. There are some books there that are $15, and some books there that are $40 or $45. Some other things I found in Bloomington, and this will be the conclusion, the wrap up, is fiction books. These are all book club editions, so they're not particularly valuable. So this one I just had to get because I love the movie. And I'll have to read this. As you can see, it's got damage to the dust jacket, but The Day of the Jackal, and even if this were a first edition, it's an American first edition, and Frederick Forsyth is a British author. So the British first edition would be the really valuable one. And I have to imagine, because of the movie, that this is probably one of his more valuable books, because of the popularity of the movie. Which, if you want a classic sort of espionage thriller game of cat and mouse movie, I can't recommend that movie enough. Great acting, lots of very stylish 70s suits worn by the Jackal, and then a little more rumpled, tweedy appearance from the French detective who's chasing him. So I said there'd be more Paul Anderson. So this is just a hardcover book club edition of one of his novels. This is one of his science fiction novels. Paul Anderson wrote both science fiction and fantasy, and he there's often a historical influence in his science fiction. Like, I think some of his science fiction stories are basically, it's like it's the 17th century Dutch East India Company in space. I don't know if it's one of these books. This one is not a particularly valuable book, but a lot of the vintage book club editions, they're not first editions, but they're still $10 or $15. So if you can get them cheap enough, they're very nice. And the other thing is, some popular fiction like science fiction or thrillers or stuff like that, sometimes it appeared in mass market paperback as its original form. That's not the case with this, I believe. But sometimes it appears, the first edition is a mass market paperback edition, and then the book club edition might actually be for their first hardcover edition, which is not usually the case. This was more highfalutin literary works where the hardcover, true hardcover first, not a book club edition, but a true hardcover first is the first edition. Paul Anderson, I haven't read much of him. I do have a liking or a good association with him because I really he wrote a short story that I did read called The Man Who Came Early, which is about basically a 1950s, back when America had a peacetime conscription, a 1950s conscript in the American Army who's serving in Iceland, by a freak electrical storm is transported to the 9th or the 10th century, sort of the age of the sagas of the Norse in Iceland. And it sort of is a reply to stories like Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, where a modern person goes back in time to the Middle Ages and then transforms things because they can invent things early and so forth and so on. Whereas Anderson is, I think one of the themes of some of his work is that just because someone is technologically inferior to you, you shouldn't assume that they're stupid, and also that the history of science doesn't work like that. This isn't an example from a story, but a classic example is if you can know what a steam boiler is, and you can know how to build a steam boiler, but if the time you've gone back to can't manufacture steel that's of good enough quality to build a steam boiler without it exploding and killing anyone, what's the point in knowing how to build a steam boiler? You need to know all the metallurgy of how to make steel, and so you can't just like bring 19th century to the Middle Ages in an afternoon. And so in the story, if you don't mind me going on, it's basically this American has all these bright ideas, but they don't work because he doesn't appreciate that there's foundational things that are different between, the age of the sagas in Iceland and like 1950s America or 1950s Iceland. And like you think he tries to build like a suspension bridge or something. I mean, a small bridge, but utilizing the principles of a suspension bridge to show people how smart he is, and it doesn't work. And anyway, I won't reveal the ending, but I think Anderson was saying is this if this man might have lived more happily had he been more humble and not tried to presume that because of his greater technological knowledge, that he was more advanced than the medieval Icelanders, who of course did have a lot of technological knowledge about woodworking and boat rigging and all these kinds of stuffs. But you can't just jump from 10th century technology to 20th century technology as easily like that. And then the last thing is another classic science fiction author, another vintage, like 1960s, book club edition with hardcover with dust jacket, Clifford Simak. All right. Thanks for your kind attention. I know it's been quite a long, rambling video. Maybe this is the sort of thing you should have on in the background while you're doing the dishes, or indeed maybe the sort of thing you shouldn't watch at all. But at any rate, if you have watched to the end, I'm vastly tickled by the compliment, and I wish you all the best.